Do you have any horror stories?
Horror might be a strong word.
I always use the word horror story because I'm
Yeah.
like being dramatic.
Right.
It's kind of the same similar thing. There was a lot of doctors out there that had no idea about how to run a practice.
Right. It's
the
kind
same
of
thing.
a joke like that I've had with some of my colleagues. It's like, hey, you're a great architect, but not a great businessman.
What type of advice might you give to an up-and-coming youngster architect that maybe something that you wish you would have known?
If you have that idea late in the process, after the concrete's already been poured, then you have an issue. Anything can be done, right? It just takes time and it takes money. People don't understand what they want.
Really might not want in
Absolutely.
something. And then you kind of like just thrown out there with the wolves and have to just figure it out.
Their friend would have an idea, or their mother might have an idea, or their cousin might have an idea, right?
You gotta cut it off somewhere, right? Hello everyone, welcome to Design Discussions with Nadine. Today I'm here with Chase Stanley, and he's the owner of Albany Studio, and he's a very talented architect. So we're going to talk to him today about all things architecture and design and get into some details about some projects that you did, which is great. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks
Good.
for having me over
Yeah,
here.
thank you so much for coming. I love to have these conversations and highlight, good work. So let's talk a little bit about your background first and about how you kind of got into architecture. I know that you said that you're a third generation construction family,
Yes.
right? So that probably made it a bit easier to kind of fall into somewhere related to building.
I started in a wood shop actually, doing carpentry work. We built cabinets. My dad was a home builder, so I grew up, on the job site, swinging a hammer.
So all
And-
hands-on stuff.
Yes, very hands-on. And so for me, I think what that does is it kind of gives me a more holistic approach to architecture, because I'm bringing that construction background as well as the formal design experience and training.
Okay, that's good, and it probably gives you a different aspect of looking at things from the other side, the actual building side, as opposed to, because you mentioned in your questionnaire that most architects don't completely grasp or understand the construction part, and then vice versa, right? Contractors might not completely understand the architecture side, so the fact that you have both going for you
Right.
is probably beneficial, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of helps us to kind of really understand like what it is that we're working with, what are the constraints, because sometimes you have a kind of unique situation that you kind of need to draw from that construction experience to really make a decision about it, right? So.
And that's the thing, because your firm does everything, right? And that's not necessarily something that's as common in this industry, where you do everything from start to finish, from architecture to the construction.
Right. So for us, it's kind of a turnkey process. So we'll walk with you from the very beginning of the project to the end. What we like to say is, from concept to completion. So you have one point of contact.
So that's a benefit for people, right? So if somebody's looking for, they definitely know they want to bring an architect into their project, because not a lot of people do that, right? There's a very small percentage of people, from what I heard from another architect, that surprisingly, it's a pretty small percentage of people that actually use architects for their like residential projects, right?
And it really depends on the type of project you're doing, right? And what's appropriate for you, what phase of life that you're in, and what are your goals for the project, right? If you're trying to achieve something really special, then it's probably worth hiring an architect, right?
Yeah, so there's definitely a benefit for people that want to do that. Now, I'm sure there's some struggles that you go through, like in any area, right? There's specific struggles that people might encounter. What would you say is the biggest struggle that you have to overcome in your career as an architect?
The biggest struggle sometimes is approaching a project with, I guess, sort of having a shared vision for what the project is going to be, right? Because a client might come with some preconceived ideas. We might have some other ideas, and if those clash, that might be an issue, right? So we kind of want to spend the time to really make sure we're on the same page, to kind of have that like-mindedness, so we can have a shared goal, a shared vision for the project.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you were born in Houston, spent some time in College Station. How long did you live in College Station?
So I lived in College Station really, all my years growing up until I came back to Houston to go to college.
And where did you go to college?
University of Houston.
Okay. And what made you choose University of Houston over other colleges?
At the time, I lived here in Houston, and I was interested in architecture. And University of Houston has a really good architecture program.
And then I'm gonna kind of backpedal a little bit back to your family's history and construction. So, what made you go into architecture as opposed to just continuing that generational construction company type thing in your family?
Gotcha. So for me, I was always interested in design. When I look at maybe a set of drawings or something, I was just kind of fascinated. Anything that's design related doesn't necessarily have to be architecture, right? In my younger years, I was interested in cars. So I went through different phases, but there's always something intriguing about design. And then kind of having that vision of what it could be before it actually comes to be, right? So that kind of creative aspect is really kind of what got me. So I spent some time around construction. I spent a lot of my childhood actually on the job site or in the office with my dad, and construction was just in my blood, right?
So yeah, it was inevitable.
It made sense that I would do architecture,
Yeah.
and I've never looked back.
Okay. And so obviously most of your projects are here in Houston or in Texas, right? But I know you have some work that you do in Hawaii on the Big Island. So how did that happen? Like it's
Right,
there's a lot of people that they do work in Texas and they maybe have a couple one-offs on other states, but Hawaii is like way out there. So how did that happen?
It's a little ways out there. It's a pretty good flight. My mentor who helped me get started in architecture, he's a retired architect, and at the time I started working with him, he helped me start Albany Studio, and
Okay.
He actually has a coffee farm over in Hawaii on the Big Islands. So we've gone out there to do projects together, and then we do work together in Houston as well.
Oh, but so he lives over there in Hawaii, or is he back and forth between
He's
Hawaii
back and forth.
Houston?
He's got a place over there and a place here in Houston as well.
Oh. Well, that must be nice. A nice vision to go over there and enjoy the atmosphere of Hawaii. Take a little vacation while you work.
Right.
That's great. So, and also you've had some projects or project that was in the AI house tour. So let's talk about that because
Yes.
that's pretty exciting.
It is.
Right?
It was very exciting for us. Last year, we had a project featured on the 2022 AI home tour, and that was a project by the flood in Hurricane Harvey originally. So the house had been flooded many times, and so it was time to demolish the house.
What was the thought process on the design there? So I know you just said that it flooded, so you wanted to elevate it a bit.
Right. So the thought process is that the house needed to be elevated to get out of the flood zone, and then the existing lot had two large oak trees, right? One front and center, and then one at the back. So anyhow, yeah, the house is elevated because of the flood zone, and that introduced some kind of unique opportunities. We were able to create this mid-level over the carport. So you've kind of got a split level where you enter at kind of a half, what you would call a half of a flight of stairs, right? And then take another half flight of stairs, and you have that mid-level over the carport. So we designed the house around two massive oak trees. There's one kind of front and center and then one in the backyard. And both of those were very important to our client.
Yeah, and I can see that here in the picture. That's, I can see the one in the front, and that's a beautiful tree. And I would, yeah, the devastation of removing that would be horrible. And I mean, I hate removing any kind of trees. I mean, I have lots of trees in my backyard. And there was actually more in the yard when we moved in, but there was some issues with the ground, and it was basically a swamp back there. So we had to bring in lots of dirt, and we lost some trees. So it's very sad when that happens. So I can imagine that, yeah, they want to kind of build around it without having to remove those. So how did you have the opportunity to explain to people to get into that home tour in the first place? It's a process. Do you have to apply, or how does that work?
So the process is really every year the AIA puts on the tour. So if you want to be a part of the tour, the house needs to be designed by a licensed architect, and it should have been built in the last 5 years, I think, as the criteria, and it needs to be in the Houston area. So they don't really select homes based on style or location, but they are looking for a variety, right? So each year there's a panel, and they select which houses will be on the home tour.
Oh, that's pretty good. And generally, how many homes do they choose for this? Because I know it's a weekend-long thing, the home tours, from what I understand, right? People can go around and look at all the homes. Do you have any idea about how many they choose?
Yes.
And then how many are submitted? So that can give an idea of...
So I'm not really sure how many projects are submitted, but I do know that they select 8 homes each year, and it's a 2-day event. So if you get the risk tag, you can go visit the homes on a Saturday, and then you can go back on a Sunday.
I know I was supposed to go on that home tour this year, but then somebody got sick in my household, so then I couldn't go. So it would have been something interesting to see, because I'm sure it's good to see highlighted homes, and there's a reason why these homes are chosen, right? Something special about them, definitely. So I have to keep my eye out for that next year and maybe take a look at those, because that's very interesting to be able to participate with. So I'm sure that was an exciting accomplishment for you guys, right?
It was, and we're very grateful that our clients wanted to show off their home. So we had a blast. It was a fun time.
That's good. That's good. If I'm a client that's looking for an architect, what would you suggest is their first thing that they should do? What should they look at? Because I mean, I know there's so many architects out there. What should a potential client look for when searching for an architect? Do you have any advice on that?
So one thing that I would say is just think about what it is that you want the house to do, right? A lot of times we think about a house as just 4 walls and a roof, but it can do a lot more than keep the rain out, right? For a lot of people, the house might be a place for them to just raise kids, maybe raise a family. It might be a place for them to just get some peace and quiet because they want to slow down their lifestyle. It might be a project where it could help them simplify their life. So we have a lot of clients asking us to do more of a minimalist type of project because they want to simplify and have a more minimalist lifestyle, right? So we have another client. He's an older gentleman. He's looking to live out the rest of his years there. So for my parents, actually, I designed their house. Their idea is that it's a place for the grandkids to come out and hang out. So each project might do something different for the owners, right? So I think about what you want the house to do, and then when you go to interview an architect, tell them that's your idea, right? And then ask questions, right? So if you understand what it is that you think you want or whatever, maybe consider what is it going to take to get that, right? And ask about the process, ask questions about the timing, ask questions about the budget, and you want to make sure that your wish list and your budget match up,
Yeah.
right? So maybe ask for someone to take a look at that, right?
And then what is your general timeline? Because I think there's also kind of a, I don't want to say misconception or unknown of what people might think that process, that initial process with an architect might take. And I mean, I'm sure it fluctuates depending on the project, how big, how detailed. But from the first time that you meet a client and they decide they want to, work with you, to the end phase of, the design process, generally about how long does that typically take?
So we kind of split it into two parts, right? What we call part number one is the pre-design phase. And we've developed something we call the vision and strategy review. And that's really before we do any design work. We want to sit down and have the conversations about, what the goal of the project is, what's the vision, what is the wish list, all those things, right? And we can develop a strategy for how we approach the design, right? So we're really developing the concept for the project. And once we establish what that concept is, that'll help us move forward through the design phase and sort of give direction for the project.
Okay.
Yeah, so the design phase is 2 to 3 months. We want to have that pre-design phase of a couple weeks before that, just because we don't want to jump into the design and head off in the wrong direction. We want to make sure we're on the same page and really avoid really just any preconceived ideas or heading off in the wrong direction and presenting something that's not really what the client needs or wants. So that pre-design phase really gives us an opportunity to understand what this project is going to be about, what the possibilities are and potentials. It gives the client the opportunity to understand, what are the options available to them. So we can look at their budget. We can look at the site. We'll do a site visit and really understand what's unique about the site. We'll spend time with the client and understand what's unique about the client. And those sort of things is what helps to drive the design forward.
So get to know a little bit more in detail.
Right.
Getting to know the client is definitely an important part of most any of these projects too, even in, our rebuilds or construction. That first initial design phase, when I meet with the client about what they want, whether it be a kitchen or a bathroom or whatever it is, getting that personal connection with them does make you understand a little bit more about what they might want or what they really might not want.
Absolutely. And a lot of times people don't understand what they want, right? Or they maybe have some ideas, but you have to sift through those ideas.
And understanding too that sometimes what they do want might not necessarily line up with their budgets.
Right.
Which happens.
And then you have to have those conversations,
yeah.
right? It's good to have those conversations early than late. And another thing is, you can have a good idea to add something to your project that might be a really great idea. It could actually improve the project. But if you have that idea late in the process, after the concrete's already been poured, then you have an issue, right? Yeah. It's going to add time. It's going to add to the budget. And those sort of things happen, right? But if you spend the proper amount of time on the pre-planning, you might avoid some of that.
Okay, so that's a good tip. Pre-planning. Make sure you do that prior to going forward, because that's going to solve a lot of problems or prevent problems, right?
Right. And this is something that happens when you do a custom house, when you do something that's unique, right? Because it's not a cookie cutter plan. This is a plan that hasn't been built before. So there's some aspects of it that you might actually be in construction and you might be on the second floor and you might notice, if we had a window right here, then we could take advantage of this view, because standing right here at this level, this is a really great view. Let's go ahead and add a window here, right? So things like that come up, right? And us as being in the design part and the construction part, we're able to make those decisions kind of real time.
But I can imagine that being in both sides, if something were to occur like that where the client changes something, it's easier for you guys to change maybe because it's, it's within the same scope
Yeah,
of what you're doing.
yeah. I mean, anything can be done, right? It just takes time and it takes money, right? But the idea is to do it at the proper time, right? Because once the frame is already there, the pipes have already been run.
Yeah.
It's difficult to undo and to redo things, right? So you really want to be ahead of that
Yeah.
if you can.
So on that same note, do you have any horror stories of something that occurred that, because things happen in construction and architecture, pretty much, I mean, any area of business, right, that aren't favorable for whether it be the architect or, contractor or the client. So what would you say, do you have any examples of a horror story that happened and how did you fix that situation?
Horror might be a strong word.
I always use the word horror story because I'm
Yeah.
like being dramatic.
Right. So I think the ones that give us the most heartburn are the projects that the client comes in a little bit late. They're behind schedule already before they've even reached out to us. And we really can't do a whole lot about that, right? We'll do our best to work with their timeline, but at the end of the day, you need to allow the proper amount of time to do things the right way without cutting corners and things like that, right? So really spending the proper amount of time to plan a project, it goes a long way. You can spend, a day in design and it might save you 10 days in construction, right?
Yeah. And I know a lot of people, once they get into that construction phase, people start to get anticipating. They get what I like to call antsy. They're like, they want to hurry up. And because I think because once they can see the vision coming to life, it's kind of like one of those things where they want to see the finished product. And I think stretching out the design phase is probably better than stretching out the construction phase.
Absolutely.
For people.
Right, because once you have boots on the ground, you're making interest payments, you're paying salaries for workers out there, and there's material costs, right? So it's much easier to change lines on paper than it is to change something that's already been built.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Now, as an architect, there's lots of people that might be wanting to get into architecture, considering going to school for that, or maybe finishing school. So what type of advice might you give to an up-and-coming youngster architect that would make their life a little easier, or maybe something that you wish you would have known before getting into the field of architecture? What advice could you give there?
The advice I would give to someone who wants to start their own firm is learn about the business side of things, and don't just run into starting a firm without understanding, how a business should be run. Right?
And that's interesting that you say that because immediately my mind went to, so prior to my construction company life, I was in healthcare. I managed healthcare clinics for United Health Group. And that was one thing that I always would say, and even some of the doctors and I would joke around about that. Like, they don't teach business to doctors, which, okay, it might seem like, well, why should they? But if you think about it at the same time, a lot of doctors have their own business because they have their own practices and everything. So it's kind of the same similar thing. There was a lot of doctors out there that, had no idea about how to run a practice.
Right. It's kind of a joke like that I've had with some of my colleagues is like, hey, you're a great architect, but not a great businessman.
Yeah.
Right. So it really kind of takes both. So maybe consider partnering with someone, right? So you might have the creative side, and then you might have someone who's kind of more business minded, right? But I would definitely give advice to kind of do the research on the business side of things, because you spend all your time in school learning about design, learning about architecture, that the rest seems to be kind of ignored, right?
And then you're kind of like just thrown out there with the wolves and have to just figure it out.
Well, yeah, there's always the school of hard knocks, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, have you ever thought about a career change? Or if it was there any other career that you considered before going into architecture, or you were just like dead set on staying in that construction because of your family history of it?
So I think when I was young, I kind of chewed on the different ideas for a little while before I decided what to go to school for. Um, but really, it's the only thing that I see myself doing. I really enjoy what I do, so I can't imagine doing anything else.
Okay. So then, on a closing note, what makes Albany Studio stand out from others that do what you do? What would you say is, we're different because of what?
Sure. So we do design and we do construction. So we're a design build firm, and that's probably the primary thing that sets us apart, makes us different, is that we understand the architecture side of things and we understand the construction side of things, and we do both.
Well, thank you, Chase, for joining me. It was a pleasure talking to you about your experience in architecture in Albany Studio. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you here.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me out. This has been really fun.
Yeah, good. Thank you. All right, so that's it for this episode. Stay tuned for the next one. Bye.